Greetings, I'm Herbert Erpaderp. Have you ever built a model of a tank where the tracks were just awful, or maybe just a little bit more annoying than you would like? I know I have, and that was the case for the 35th scale MiniArt T-34 that I've been working on lately. And if you want to see that build video, it'll be along soon. The kit's tracks were certainly not the worst I've ever seen, but they were going to take hours of cleanup and then be kind of annoying to put together. So what better opportunity to try a 3D printed solution? As with most things, I'm inept when it comes to 3D design. Making my own tracks was obviously out of the question, but I did find a couple of options by other people. I chose to print a set from somebody named Tank Brusher. They seemed like the best out of all the ones I could find, and there's a link where you can get these links in the description. They do seem to have a lot of different tracks and bits that you can print, and they look pretty decent, as I'm sure you will agree, these T-34 links do. You get files for the two regular links, one with the horn and one without. You get a choice of pre-supported or unsupported. I chose pre-supported. You also get the grousers or ice cleats or whatever you prefer to call them. That is, individual cleats and links with the cleats installed. I think that's a pretty cool inclusion. You also get track pins, both individual pins and in a crate, just to make printing a whole bunch of them easy. This does seem pretty good, though personally I didn't have any luck with the resin pins. They did cost money, $8 Australian, so probably like €0.50, but I would say they're worth it. I mean, I can't make this myself, so I'm happy to pay for somebody else's skill. They printed almost perfectly. I did have a couple of failures here and there, all of which were on links with guide horns. It was probably caused by something I did. I am still very much new at 3D printing. What matters is that, other than those couple of errors, everything went pretty well. The MiniArt kit I printed these for suggests 114 links in total, and I printed far more than I needed, but that's because I can't count. It did save me from having to reprint the couple that failed. Better to have too many than not enough. You may be able to see that there are two shades of grey here, and that's because I printed some in both kinds of resin I've got, ABS-like and regular 2.0 Elegoo resin, whatever that's called. I did that mostly to see if it made a difference with the pins, and it did. The ABS-like is more flexible, so the pins were more flexible. Shocker, I know. That's neither here nor there as far as the links are concerned. This video is not about experimenting with resin, it's about the track links, so let's get to putting them together. This is very simple, and the simplicity is a big selling point for me. There was pretty much no cleanup needed beyond a couple of bumps from the supports, and those only take a second to sand off. This is already a huge time saving over the kit's links. The links do sort of stay together with friction, but they will come apart with only gentle provocation, and that's why we need pins to hold the tracks together. Oh, thanks, Captain Obvious! The pins do flex a bit, and the ones I did in ABS-like resin flexed even more than this. I didn't even try using those. Also, being a thin piece of resin, they're not overly strong. I would imagine they are strong enough to hold the links together for normal use, however, they're not strong enough to handle being forced into the holes. If you can't get them into the holes, they won't link the tracks together. Thanks again, Captain Obvious! The problem is the pins are too thick. I've not done any measuring, but I assume they're the same size as the holes. They would probably plop right in if they were thinner. Some of you might suggest that you could drill the holes out to make them a bit bigger, and you could, but that kind of negates the time saved over using the kit's tracks. One solution is to glue the tracks together. The ones you see here are the MiniArt links. With all of the cleanup I had to do, this set of 12 took about 40 minutes to put together, which is kind of a lot. Why are you showing the MiniArt links, Herbert? Well, I also glued a couple of runs of the printed tracks together like this for the bottom of the tank where they'd be in contact with the ground, but I didn't film it. Doing this works pretty well here, where all of the links are flat and straight, but it will get annoying very quickly when you want the tracks to go up and around the running gear. Using brass rod for track pins is probably the obvious solution, and it works pretty much exactly as you might expect it would. You join the track links together, and then you slide the rod through. Then, surprise surprise, you cut away the excess. I used 0.3mm brass rod for this. I did initially try with 0.5mm rod that I had on hand, and it did work, but it was just a bit too big. It took a bit more force to get the wire into the holes, and the links didn't move as freely, so 0.3mm it was. You might think that 0.2mm wouldn't make that much of a difference, but it is actually kind of significant when you look at them. I think 0.4mm would have been a better size, but that actually seemed kind of hard to find. 0.3mm works just fine, though a couple of the pins did work themselves a bit loose. To make sure the pin definitely stays in its place, you might like to add a drop of superglue at the end. Obviously not so much that it sticks the links together. It does take a while to join all the links together, but nowhere near as long as using the kit's tracks would have taken. And just look at how freely they move. These are going to be significantly easier to put onto the model than the kit's individual links that don't link together. The way I assembled these track links was to do it in small chunks. Even though it's not the biggest task, I still didn't really want to spend a couple of hours sitting there doing the same repetitive task, so I do them in small bursts. Doing them in small groups makes adding the glue to the ends of the pins a bit easier, and it also makes them easier to count. The numbers in the groups don't really matter, as long as you end up with the appropriate number of links. Eventually, there's a couple of nice long runs of tracks with a nice flat section for the bottom of the run. You might not find that helpful, but I did. Installing the tracks is pretty simple. I would recommend doing this before adding all of the easily broken detail, but you don't have to. It would also be easier if the drive sprocket had a polycap in it, so it could be moved, but this kit didn't have that option. Having one end of the run be a straight, rigid set of tracks does make this a bit less fiddly. So does holding that straight run of tracks onto the wheels with blue tack or something similar. All you've got to do is connect the ends and stick a pin in it. I leave the final pin a bit long and bend it around so that it can be removed easily, and obviously I don't glue it. That way I can remove the tracks later for painting, but we can still enjoy how it looks now, and I do quite like the way they look. My only problem is they look a little bit tight. I would like it if there was a bit more slack. Because of the way T-34 tracks work, if you want to lengthen the tracks you have to do so by 2 links, which is way too much. I suppose you could make adjustments to the wheels, but that's really more of a thing you should do before the wheels are all glued in place. The links look good anyway, so I'm happy. Here's how they compare to the MiniArt kit's track links. The dimensions are almost exactly the same. The connector links do look a tiny bit smaller, and that could be why there isn't as much slack as I want, but they are very close. Close enough to not make much of a difference at all, really. Close enough that they could even be linked together if you want. The MiniArt links do have slightly better detail, mostly because they've got numbers moulded into them. It's a good detail, though it is small and you'd have to look close to see it, so I wouldn't say it's especially important. And I suppose if you were really keen, you could modify the 3D model and add that detail as well. And that's not something I'm especially interested in doing, but if you wanted, you could. So in the end, both sets of tracks do look quite nice. So why use the 3D printed ones? In this case, it's entirely a time, effort, and sanity-saving measure. I really didn't want to remove the mold lines and flash from the joining surfaces of every single link. In addition to that, the kit's links don't link. They will sit together with friction, like the 3D printed ones do, but they won't stay there. And with no default option to use pins, you'll either have to spend a bunch of time drilling, or painstakingly positioning the links and then gluing them. Both of which would be very time consuming, so, at least in my mind, replacing the tracks altogether made sense. I feel like maybe it does make more sense to use these on kits that come with rubber band tracks, but in this case it's also really good for saving time. They do cost money, only $8 dues, so like €1. You've also got to factor in a couple of dollars worth of brass rod and resin. Still, it's probably cheaper than buying sets of workable track links. And obviously, the more T-34s you build, the more cost-effective it is. I feel like this is a great use for 3D printing. In this case, it's a time saver, though in other cases, it could be a detail improver. Obviously, you wouldn't go out and buy a printer just to get yourself a set of tracks, but if you've already got one, this is a very good use for it indeed. If you want to see the rest of the MiniArt T-34 build, it'll be along soon. Or if you're watching this in the future, there's a link in the description. There is also a link where you can find these links I've used. Go and check them out if you're looking to print up some tracks. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below. Subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of thing, share it with anybody you think might find it useful, and if you really like what I do, consider supporting on Patreon or Ko-fi. Links for those are in the description too. Take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.